Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Fantastic Military World. In this video, we will talk about the European preparation for the introduction of mandatory military service, a reflection of the tensions caused by Russia and Ukraine. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and activate the notification bell to not miss any news. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, Europe's military readiness level was one of the lowest in decades. Since 1991, after the Soviet collapse, European countries began a deep process of disinvestment in defense, leading to a drastic reduction in the percentage of GDP reserved for this important sector. This directly reflected on two main points: the size of European armed forces and, mainly, the level of readiness. Interestingly, in technological terms, there was no negative impact, with European defense industries developing, and producing very modern and lethal weapons. However, due to low internal investment in defense, quantities have always been very low. This combination of factors resulted in very modern European armed forces, operating the best in terms of armored vehicles, artillery, helicopters, and planes, but always in relatively small quantities and, even more worrying, always with a very low level of readiness. To give you an idea of what this means, the British Army, which was once the largest and most powerful in the world, today is formed by just over 70,000 soldiers, operating about 200 heavy Challenger 2 tanks, of which only 30% are in maximum readiness mode. The same happens in other branches of the British Armed Forces, such as the Royal Air Force, with just over 135 Eurofighter Typhoon fighters, with estimates indicating that only 20% are in immediate readiness mode. And as I mentioned, this highly concerning situation, which is evident across Europe, reached its peak during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a highly intense conflict involving over 500,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, supported by large numbers of tanks, aircraft, and thousands of artillery pieces, numbers much higher than the soldiers and equipment available for immediate deployment in Europe. One of the first measures implemented by Europe to solve this serious problem was the reactivation of various industries and assembly lines for weapons and ammunition, mainly artillery, a type of weapon that is proving to be essential in Ukraine. But there is also the issue of military manpower, which, as I mentioned, is very low in Europe, with one of the measures to solve this being mandatory military service in the vast majority of European countries. No one is obligated to serve in the armed forces, with military service being entirely voluntary. This means that often many countries cannot fill all the open positions in their armed forces. Still, regarding the United Kingdom, almost 20% of open positions in the Army, Air Force, and Navy are vacant due to lack of interest from young people. This is obviously a highly concerning situation, especially considering the statements of many European leaders, such as French President Emmanuel Macron and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who have said repeatedly in recent months that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is not an isolated conflict restricted to Ukraine, and that if Putin wins that war, Russia will continue to advance through Europe, first against non-NATO countries such as Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova, and then against the more peripheral members of the alliance, such as the Baltic states, Poland, and Romania. If this happens, and if Europe remains at the current level of weapons production, readiness, and number of active military personnel, the result could be disastrous for the entire continent, with the introduction of mandatory military service being, as I mentioned, one of the actions that European countries are preparing to adopt. Countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, and Denmark have been debating mandatory military service for months, with other countries like Portugal and Poland, the latter aiming to become the largest European army in the next 2 years, also internally debating this issue. According to some analysts, through mandatory military service in 2 years, Europe will almost double its number of reservists, reaching at the end of 4 or 5 years a level almost 3 times higher of reservists compared to current values. The number of reservists available for combat in case of military emergency is vital for the security of a country, as it allows for the formation of new combatants much more quickly than if instruction were necessary from scratch. And with Europe going through a highly critical moment in terms of security, with the continent, according to many European leaders, in a pre-war phase against Russia, the criterion of the number of reservists could be the difference between freedom or subjugation to a foreign power. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any news, criticisms, ideas, or suggestions. You can leave them in the comments.